They told us history repeats itself. But what if it was simply following a script? One designed not through chaos, but choreography. Every crash, every panic, every once-in-a-century event has been another rehearsal for the same final act, a 48-hour transition that replaces the old economy of paper and debt with the new architecture of programmable value. The story begins in 2008, when the global financial crisis tore through the illusion of trust. Banks collapsed, governments bailed out failure, and the average citizen was told the system had been saved. But beneath the headlines, something deeper happened. A seed was planted. Out of the ashes came blockchain. To the public, it was rebellion, a digital form of money without masters. But to those watching closely, it was the perfect test environment for what would come next. A controlled, auditable, always-on financial web. Between 2009 and 2015, nations around the world began quietly digitizing their payment rails. The word innovation became a disguise for infiltration. Mobile banking, fintech, online IDs, conveniences wrapped around surveillance. Each new layer linked more data, more dependency, and more compliance. The people applauded, believing they were gaining freedom through technology. In truth, they were being mapped. Then came 2016-2020, the infrastructure years. Behind the noise of elections and media wars, a silent alliance formed. Central banks, the IMF, the BIS, and the tech giants that controlled the cloud. Together, they began designing interoperability standards, token frameworks, and instant settlement systems that would allow money to move like information. Ripple's technology, the rise of ISO 2022, and the testing of CBDCs weren't random innovations. They were puzzle pieces in a single architecture, a new global ledger. When 2020 arrived, the world locked down, physically and economically. What looked like panic was, in hindsight, a live-fire test of digital dependency. Work, school, communication, and commerce all went online. Governments distributed stimulus through instant payment portals. Citizens scanned QR codes for movement and medical proof. A population that once demanded privacy now accepted traceability in the name of safety. The global rehearsal had begun. From 2021 to 2024, the rollout accelerated. Payment apps merged with identity systems. Central banks released pilot programs for digital dollars, euros, and yuan. FedNow, Project Dunbar, mBridge, RailUS, each announced as an experiment, but all speaking the same hidden language of ISO standard interoperability. Markets were volatile, inflation intentional, and debt ceilings theatrical. Distractions for an audience unaware they were watching the dismantling of the old system in real time. By 2025, tokenization moved from theory to policy. Real estate, stocks, commodities, and carbon credits began taking digital form. Assets became code. Ownership became data. As artificial intelligence advanced, it was quietly integrated into risk systems and monetary control. Learning every spending habit, every asset flow, every behavioral pattern, the global economy was being coded into compliance. The plan doesn't end with collapse, it ends with conversion. Sometime before 2030, a trigger event will occur. Whether it's a coordinated cyber attack, a debt implosion, or a liquidity crisis, the result will be the same. The old banking network will freeze for safety. Transactions will halt, markets will close, and the world will hold its breath. For 48 hours, silence. And then reboot. When the lights come back on, money will have changed forever. The new system won't ask for your consent, it will already contain you. Each citizen tagged by digital ID, each dollar programmable, each transaction traceable in real time. The world will call it stability, safety, modernization, but those who've been watching will recognize it for what it truly is, the final execution of a plan written years ago. And in the center of it all, the neutral bridge, XRP, standing between collapsing fiat and the tokenized world that replaces it. Not the villain, not the hero, but the instrument. The silent protocol that makes the reset possible. The curtain hasn't fallen yet. The actors are still performing. But as the countdown to 2030 ticks closer, remember this: the system was never broken. It was being rebuilt. Part 1, The Seeds of Control, 2008-2015. Every ending needs a beginning. For this story, that beginning was September 2008, the week the global financial heart stopped beating. The television anchors called it panic. Economists called it a once-in-a-century event. But for those pulling the levers, it was opportunity. The collapse of Lehman Brothers and the trillion-dollar bailouts that followed did more than shatter confidence. They made the entire planet dependent on a system that no longer trusted itself. Fear became policy. When the dust settled, the architects of money realized something profound. Control would no longer come from banks alone. It would come from code. Within a year, an anonymous white paper appeared online. Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. To most, it looked like rebellion against central authority. But deep within intelligence and banking circles, it was studied with fascination. A network that could move value outside the banking grid was either a threat or the prototype for the next grid. As 2009 turned into the new decade, central banks quietly began digitizing their plumbing. The word innovation was used in every speech, but behind it sat the same motive that had guided policy for a century: visibility. Payment networks were merged, settlements accelerated, and regulations tightened under the banner of anti-money laundering. The public heard security. The institutions heard control. In 2010, global think tanks began discussing a phrase that few paid attention to: financial inclusion. On paper, it meant helping the unbanked. In practice, it meant bringing every person on Earth into a trackable system. Mobile money pilots in Africa, Aadhaar digital IDs in India, and early biometric banking trials all shared a single trait: each required data. The currency of the future wasn't dollars. It was information about who you were, where you spent, and how often you obeyed. Then came 2012, and a small company out of San Francisco introduced something radical: a bridge ledger designed to connect all currencies through trustless settlement, Ripple. To most of the crypto world, it was the opposite of Bitcoin's rebellion: fast, efficient, corporate. But to the suits in boardrooms, it was elegant. No miners, no waste, no anarchy, just interoperability. Ripple's early meetings with banks and central bank researchers went largely unnoticed. But those conversations laid the foundation for what would later become the ISO 2022 standard, the common digital language of value. Between 2013 and 2015, blockchain became the new buzzword. Venture capital poured in, governments commissioned reports, and universities opened innovation labs. But the real story was in the patterns. Every institution that once rejected crypto began hiring blockchain engineers. The rebellion had been absorbed by the empire. The same Wall Street firms that crashed the old system were quietly building the next one. Meanwhile, society's trust was being redirected. The smartphone replaced the wallet. The cloud replaced the filing cabinet. The password replaced the signature. And the user, the everyday person, became both customer and data source. With each tap, swipe, and sign-in, the behavioral map of humanity grew clearer. By 2015, the financial world was ready for Phase 2. The BIS announced studies on distributed ledgers for central bank settlement. The IMF began publishing papers on cross-border efficiency. Regulators proposed frameworks for real-time gross settlement. None of it made the evening news, yet every paragraph was a blueprint for tokenized money. The narrative given to the public was recovery. The reality was reconstruction. What began as an economic rescue in 2008 had transformed into a full-scale redesign of the world's monetary architecture. The seeds of control had been planted, in code, in regulation, and in psychology. Bitcoin had proven that digital value could exist. Ripple had proven that it could move across borders in seconds. The next challenge would be turning that technology into governance, money that obeyed the system instead of defying it. The stage was ready. The networks were forming. All that was left was the next global event to push everything forward. Part 2, the digital infrastructure, 2016-2020. By 2016, the world had recovered, at least on paper. Markets were booming, tech stocks were soaring, and the word innovation had become a religion. But behind the optimism, the architects were busy laying fiber optic roots for something entirely different. The foundation stones of the new monetary order were no longer made of gold or paper. They were lines of code, servers, and standards. While headlines obsessed over elections and social unrest, global finance was quietly merging with global technology. The IMF and BIS announced working groups on cross-border digital settlement. The World Economic Forum launched the Future of Digital Currency Initiative. SWIFT tested its GPI network. speeding international payments to minutes. RippleNet expanded from a Silicon Valley startup into a coalition of banks spanning every continent. The media called it modernization. The insiders called it integration. Each new protocol carried the same DNA: interoperability. Whether it was Ethereum's smart contracts, Quant's overledger, or Ripple's ISO 2022 alignment, the goal was identical: make every financial system speak one language. It was the same playbook that built the internet: unify communication first, then control access. By 2017, that language was written in standards that would later define CBDCs. Then came the cryptocurrency boom of 2017-2018, a global frenzy that looked like chaos but functioned like a stress test. Billions of dollars moved through decentralized rails faster than any regulator could blink. The establishment did not interfere. It observed. The ICO mania was proof of concept for tokenization itself. People had just demonstrated they would trust digital numbers over paper bills if the story was good enough. As the bubble burst, governments stepped in with sympathy and new laws. Consumer protection, they called it. But each law tightened the loop around the digital economy: KYC rules, exchange reporting, data sharing agreements. The rebellion had been cataloged and filed into compliance. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence quietly entered the financial stack. What began as trading algorithms became behavioral prediction systems. Data from phones, browsers, and transactions fed into models that could forecast consumer mood, credit risk, and even political tendencies. Banks called it risk management. Governments called it stability. The result was the same: a machine that learned how humanity spends and what it fears. By 2018, Ripple was signing agreements with hundreds of financial institutions. Its X-Current and X-Rapid products proved instant liquidity between fiat and digital assets. The XRP ledger was processing transactions in seconds, while Bitcoin and Ethereum still lagged in minutes and hours. The efficiency was too tempting for central banks to ignore. For the first time, governments saw that digital assets could replace the aging SWIFT system entirely. The question was not if, but when. In 2019, the Bank for International Settlements published its first CBDC survey. Over 80% of central banks admitted they were exploring digital currencies. At the same time, the IMF launched its digital currency division, and Facebook announced Libra, a stablecoin that scared governments into accelerating their own projects. The world was being nudged toward a cashless future under the guise of competition. Then 2020 arrived. A virus spread, the world locked down, and suddenly the dream of a fully digital economy became necessity. Physical money was unsafe. Bank branches closed. Stimulus payments were delivered digitally to millions in days. The global supply chain froze, but the data flow never stopped. The event was chaos for citizens and proof of concept for governments. The entire world could be run remotely if the infrastructure existed, and it did. During those months, projects that had been on timelines for 2030 were pushed forward a decade. FedNow, Project Helvetia, and BISM Bridge moved from research to pilot. Banks tested instant cross-border settlement using digital tokens. AI risk systems proved they could manage monetary flows faster than any human committee. And while the population worried about curfews, supply chains, and vaccines, the blueprint for a digital monetary order solidified. When the world reopened, nothing was the same. Cash was dirty, work was remote, data was currency, and every major economy now had an active digital currency program. The old financial world was not dying by accident. It was being digitized out of existence. The architects had finished the scaffolding. All that remained was to run a final simulation, a rehearsal so global, so psychological, that billions would accept the next phase without question. And that rehearsal was about to begin. Part 3, the Global Rehearsal, 2020-2024. The curtain rose in 2020, and the rehearsal began. What looked like a world in chaos was in fact a synchronized experiment in control, a global stress test wrapped in fear, policy, and screens. Governments locked down nations, markets crashed, and citizens retreated behind glass rectangles, yet in the background code kept running. The network never slept. The invisible infrastructure, digital IDs, QR systems, and instant payment rails, clicked into place as if they'd been waiting for the cue. For the first time in history, humanity lived inside a digital mirror of itself. Work, school, faith, and even protest were streamed. The real world was paused. The data world took over. And within that mirror, the architects could measure everything: velocity of money, emotion of markets, movement of populations, and in real time. The phrase "build back better" spread from speech to speech like a mantra, as if every nation had suddenly received the same script. Stimulus checks flowed through newly tested rails. Retailers that once handled cash now accepted only cards or apps. Health passes became proof of identity, and by extension, proof of access. The more the population complied, the faster the system learned. Each crisis response uploaded new rules into the digital nervous system that would later become programmable finance. The people believed it was temporary. The architects knew it was permanent. By 2021, the next act unfolded. Inflation spiked, debt ceilings returned, and supply chains snapped like violin strings. Every headline shouted panic, but the real story hid beneath the noise: the acceleration of the token economy. Governments began quietly issuing digital bonds on blockchain networks. Corporations tokenized carbon credits, commodities, and real estate. Every shortage or delay justified a new level of automation, tracking, and verification. Meanwhile, the crypto market exploded again. Meme coins distracted the public while infrastructure coins matured behind the curtain. XRP, XDC, XLM, and QNT aligned with ISO 2022, the new standard language for value transfer. Chainlink's oracles began feeding real-world data into blockchains. AI tools started managing liquidity, predicting volatility before it happened. The digital economy had grown a brain. In 2022, the crypto winter froze retail enthusiasm, but not institutional interest. While social media declared the end of blockchain, the world's largest banks filed patents for tokenized assets and digital settlement systems. Ripple expanded partnerships with central banks from Europe to the Middle East. The BIS published its blueprint for a unified ledger. Every component of the coming architecture was now operational, hidden behind the fog of crisis headlines. At the same time, surveillance expanded under the banner of safety. Know Your Customer rules became Know Your Behavior. AI compliance models monitored not just transactions, but intent. Social media sentiment became part of credit scoring. The invisible line between finance and psychology vanished. Money no longer just measured value, it measured obedience. By 2023, CBDC pilots were in full swing. China's digital yuan processed billions in transactions. The EU tested the digital euro. The United States rolled out FedNow, branding it as a faster payment service rather than what it truly was: the domestic rail for programmable currency. Behind closed doors, global committees discussed interoperability between CBDCs, stablecoins, and tokenized assets. The language of liquidity became software code. And yet the public conversation stayed fixated on distractions: culture wars, politics, celebrity trials. While the masses argued over noise, the foundation of a new financial order solidified beneath their feet. Every swipe, scan, and tap pushed humanity deeper into the grid. By 2024, the rehearsal neared its finale. AI systems were publicly introduced as co-pilots for productivity, but privately tested for governance. Quantum computing projects received unprecedented funding under national security budgets. The phrase "tokenization of everything" appeared in mainstream financial reports for the first time. The world had been conditioned, primed to accept digital transformation as evolution, not revolution. And when the next shock arrives, whether cyber attack, debt implosion, or liquidity crisis, and no one will question the solution, the reset switch will already exist, hidden in the servers of payment networks and central banks. In a single weekend, the legacy system can be paused, audited, and replaced. The rehearsal ends not with applause, but with acceptance. Because by 2024, the population has learned its role: to watch the show, believe the story, and never look behind the curtain. The next act will be shorter, sharper, final. The script calls it the 48-hour flip. Part 4, the trigger, the 48-hour flip. The system doesn't collapse overnight. It drifts into stillness. One Friday afternoon, the world slows. Markets pause earlier than expected. News anchors mention scheduled upgrades and liquidity coordination. Most people shrug, log off, and head home. But somewhere in the hum of servers, a quiet sequence begins. Data centers flicker from blue to amber light. Files merge, numbers align, and an ocean of transactions begins shifting toward a cleaner frame. The event has no villain, no speech, just a headline that reads, "Temporary network synchronization. Normal operations will resume soon." Hours pass. Transfers hang mid-air pending. Payment apps spin their icons in patient loops. The world grows silent enough to hear itself think. Inside command rooms filled with screens, technicians watch colored lines of code stream across maps. Every continent pulses in rhythm as legacy systems talk to new ones for the first time. A generation of infrastructure, decades old, melts into updated ledgers that move value like light. The process is clinical, precise, rehearsed. Day one ends in quiet. The hum of the digital grid lowers until cities feel weightless. Families eat dinner by candlelight, unaware they're living through history's cleanest reboot. By the second sunrise, patterns stabilize. Data pings confirm synchronization. Networks that once fought over compatibility now speak fluently. Balances refresh with exact accuracy. No loss, no chaos, only new speed. Then almost casually, a message appears on every device. Update complete, systems optimized. No parades, no warnings. Commerce resumes before breakfast. Transfers that once took days now settle before the coffee cools. People call it the 48-hour flip. Some say it felt like time skipping ahead. Others barely noticed anything at all. In the following days, commentators praise the efficiency. Financial writers describe it as the final step in modernization. The day value became as fluid as data. They speak of transparency, accountability, the end of delays. For most, it's just convenience. For a few, it feels like destiny quietly fulfilled. The flip doesn't mark an ending, it marks an awakening. Old code retires, new code breathes. The global rhythm evens out as if every ledger now beats to one pulse. And when historians trace the timeline, they'll point not to panic or collapse, but to precision. The weekend the world took a breath, reorganized itself and pressed enter. Part 5, the new system. When the world came back online, there was no grand celebration. No announcement, no confetti, no speech. Just a quiet sense that something beneath the surface had changed. Payments no longer lagged. Delays were gone. The invisible friction of daily transactions had vanished, replaced by a smooth, silent efficiency that felt almost natural, like the system had always been this way. People adapted instantly. They always do. In offices and cafes, employees noticed transfers posting instantly. In markets, trade volumes moved faster than eyes could follow. Governments praised new infrastructure resilience, and reporters echoed the phrase until it became background noise. Few stopped to wonder how deep the upgrade went, or who truly owned the rails it now ran on. Behind the glow of devices and dashboards, the architecture pulsed, millions of ledgers synchronizing in perfect tempo. Each interaction left a precise imprint, digital fingerprints woven into the rhythm of daily life. To most, this was convenience. To those watching patterns, it was the birth of something new, a global organism made of numbers and trust. Economists called it the dawn of real-time value. They said money had finally evolved to match the speed of thought. The human race had entered an age where value could move anywhere, instantly, without borders. Yet hidden in the beauty of that speed was a question that no one quite dared to ask. If everything is instant, who decides when to stop? In the months that followed, a new kind of transparency emerged. Receipts updated themselves. Taxes tallied automatically. Fraud nearly disappeared. For the first time, the global economy appeared orderly. Data had replaced doubt, but with perfect visibility came perfect dependence. The system was too efficient to ever switch off again. The networks adapted further. Artificial intelligence learned to predict transaction patterns, smoothing spikes before they became crises. Quantum encryption sealed communications in light itself. Supply chains, markets, and currencies merged into a single breathing system, an invisible framework humming under civilization's skin. For the average person, life carried on. Rent was paid, groceries arrived, flights lifted off on time. But beneath the calm, everything that moved carried a new kind of signature, a traceable pulse echoing through the network of value. Money had become not just a medium, but a message. Old world systems, paper contracts, delayed settlements, and physical cash lingered only as nostalgia. People framed old banknotes like artifacts from a slower era. They didn't disappear. They simply stopped being relevant. Institutions rebranded this era as the Great Modernization. Economists filled panels with optimism about seamless global liquidity. To them, the transition was proof of humanity's progress, evidence that we had finally built a system too synchronized to fail. Yet some could still feel it. That faint hum in the background, the mechanical heartbeat of a civilization now fully digitized. For them, the silence after the 48-hour flip felt different. It wasn't the sound of freedom. It was the sound of something vast and precise moving on its own. But maybe that was the point all along. Maybe humanity hadn't built a machine to serve it, but one to mirror it. A reflection of our own need for order, speed, and certainty. And as the world settled into its new rhythm, the line between the digital and the human blurred completely. The ledgers ran without pause. The lights never dimmed. The flow of value continued, infinite and perfect. The system had not failed. It had evolved. The silent upgrade. The story you just witnessed isn't a warning. It's a reflection. Every system we build becomes a mirror of ourselves, our order, our chaos, our ambition to perfect what can't be controlled. The 48-hour flip wasn't just about technology. It was about evolution, the point where human trust became digital and value began to think for itself. History won't remember the code or the cables. It'll remember the feeling, the moment the world grew quiet and everything simply worked. That silence wasn't the end. It was the sound of a new beginning. Because revolutions don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they hum softly beneath our fingertips, disguised as progress. If this story made you think, if it made you question the world behind the screen, then you were part of the movement. Like, comment, and subscribe to LTL Productions, where we turn the unseen into cinema, and every question becomes a story waiting to be told. The system didn't fail. It upgraded, and maybe so did we.